people who don't really understand attachment will connect withdrawal, avoidant, dismissive as not being able to love.
Oh, goodness.
Not wanting a relationship.
Oh, goodness.
And it can't be farther from the truth. Cheers.
Cheers, Michael.
So we are back. This is our second episode. Excited about this. And we're talking today, we're going to do a little deep dive. And this episode is important because we're really going to start laying the foundation, setting the scene for everything else we're going to be talking about. This is a true kind of intro, deep dive into attachment. Its history, how we use it, how we see it, how we apply it. That's redundant, but yeah, we're going to do that. And so I did want to make sure this is clear because after all, that's what this podcast is about, is making attachment accessible and available for the general public.
And just like attachment, foundation is important.
Yeah.
And also, just like attachment, it just needs to be good enough. Because
I struggle with that.
Because
good enough is not perfect.
Parenting is just a series of failures that is peppered with some successes. And no one can be a perfect parent. You don't need to be. You just need to be good enough.
But this one, so I won't do this with every episode, but I did want to. And so we're going to intro with, well, we should talk about our drink.
Absolutely.
Because we're going to be doing that each episode.
I sure
preparing
hope so.
A cocktail and or wine. But this one is a Perfect Manhattan. The name itself, are you familiar with Perfect Manhattan?
Only because I know you.
Oh, okay.
And I hadn't been before you.
So it's not based on because I made it perfectly. I mean, I did, but the Perfect Manhattan is, instead of just dry vermouth, which a regular Manhattan is just dry vermouth, whiskey, and bitters. The Perfect Manhattan introduces a sweet vermouth. So it's a half ounce sweet vermouth, half ounce of dry vermouth, 2 ounces of whiskey, and 2 dashes of bitters.
Delicious.
And it turns out quite nice, quite perfectly.
Quite.
So it's really funny that we're doing the Perfect Manhattan and we're recording because it wasn't perfect.
Correct. We could rename it as the Good Enough Manhattan, the Bulby Manhattan.
There we go. That'll be our signature. We'll have to figure out what that is.
Oh, yeah.
The Good Enough Manhattan. And we're going to be posting these on the socials, TikToks, YouTube, Facebook. And so if you want to see how to make the drink,
oh yeah,
follow us there.
Yes.
Other than that, we're just going to be two therapists having a drink, talking about attachment.
And enjoying each other's company.
Right. As always. So let's dive in. Let's start.
Okay.
What is attachment?
Yeah, the great question. You want to go?
I'm going to let you go.
Okay, I'll go. Attachment, I've come across hundreds of different ways of, I think, the way people summarize it. I think my current preference is to talk about attachment as a critical period of development that spans the ages of maybe 6 months to 18 months, maybe all the way into 3 years of life. It's a critical period of brain development in particular. And that brain development is highly reflective of the nature of parental caregiving to the infant. And that set of experiences across time seems to culminate in some distinct and distinctive patterns that influences all sorts of aspects of life, namely relationships. And since relationships are in every aspect of life, including being with oneself, it's a pretty comprehensive impact. And so attachment is the scientific study of that critical developmental period and its lifelong implications, impacts, influences.
Yeah. And I think that's where it's not that we differ. We focus on the body of attachment differently.
Yeah.
and we talked about in the first, like where we came from. And so developmentally, I have that understanding of what you're talking about, those 6 months to 18 months. In my field of study and where I work every day is more specifically relational and adult relationships. So applying the principles that have come out over time, because I think originally attachment was seen as that. Like that's the original body study was the infancy.
Oh yeah, sure.
And when I work with couples, I'm looking at it through the adult lens, but using the information from the specific scientific studies. Yeah. And so like when I think of it in the couples research, I say research in the practices and applications, one way I've heard of it is attachment is no longer just kind of the mother-infant bond that we're looking at, but it's all relationships like you mentioned. Yeah. But when I say relationships, I'm also talking about careers, parenting, childhood relationships, friend relationships, romantic relationships, all those.
Professional relationships.
Professional, yeah, exactly. And then, but from timeline, the quote, and I don't know who specifically said this, but it's from cradle to grave. So it goes on, and even some would say beyond, because we can still have an attachment with someone who's not physically present. And so I have some stories about that and we'll bring in later, but from cradle to grave. And then some research they're even saying is third trimester.
Yeah.
Like that the attachment starts building there. So I think I'm real excited because we are going to have some differing opinions, but I think we have some, while they're differing, I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah. They're not incompatible.
Right. There we go.
At least I don't think they're going to be.
I mean, we may have some fights, but that's fine. We'll repair. So when you're looking at it through the lens, that very scientific, data-driven, observational, maybe talk about that a little bit, how this really is an observational science and how you come to structure it and understand it.
Sure. I guess that starts with Ainsworth's observation or even Bowlby's observations.
Oh, let's be real. Ainsworth did all the work.
Well, you certainly have this movement through the child guidance movement that is starting to see the detrimental effects of maternal deprivation when these children in foster care and hospitals and group homes, foster homes are being deprived of maternal care that's consistent. And the workers around there have been observing that these children have some grave difficulties later in life, including within childhood. But yeah, Ainsworth comes up with this way of organizing categorically through observing interactions between mother and infant, and including, and in particular, focusing on the infant's reactions to the world, including their caregivers and including strangers, and observing many different types of behaviors. And then we look toward adults. We can observe the mind, the way that the mind is kind of represented in discourse or language, and observe patterns that we particularly pay attention to that showed these distinct categorical patterns that seem to reflect the similar kind of patterns that were observed in childhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah. And so attachment is every bit of something that we do as much as it is something that's within us.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people, again, part of what we're doing here is we're trying to make it clear. We're trying to take it out of maybe the pop psychology.
Sure.
That it's turned into.
Sure.
Especially as of late.
But also maybe take it out of the academy where it's also sort of inaccessible.
Right. We have a difficult job ahead of us. Find balance. No, I don't know where I was going with that.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Oh, that's where, okay. We'll catch up there. Attachment is a rich understanding of how we see ourselves, how we understand ourselves, how we live with ourselves, but how we also exist with the other. And so that view of self and other is paramount to this field. And I think sometimes we can just think of it as like a lovey-dovey relationship type things, good parenting, sweet parenting. But really at the core of it, it's about how you understand and see, live within yourself and how you exist with the other around. Am I saying that? Would you reword that anyway?
Well, I think you could start with, we are profoundly relational beings. We live in a profoundly social world. That's the social world orders our existence, and it is our existence. It's what our existence comes from.
Right.
And the degree to which attachment is this study of relationships, it is a study about our entire being.
Right.
Yeah. And it radiates in all directions because no matter what task we're involved in, no matter if we are alone, reflecting upon our own lives, sharing in a sort of impersonal way with someone, or in a very intimate relationship with a romantic partner or a child or a parent, or we are relating. And
Always.
this attachment science is about how that happens, what's going on as it happens, what's optimal, what's suboptimal, what's ideal, less ideal, effective, less effective. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one of the ways I look at it is how are we going to survive
Yes.
in any given situation?
Yeah. Yeah. And the answer is through the social world.
Right.
However,
In fact, that's what the main studies originated from within the children's homes,
yeah, sure.
and how children developed severe brain damage or
Yes.
physically died
Yes.
because of the lack of connection, attachment.
Relationship.
Yeah.
Social world. Yeah.
So it's a really important thing we're talking about.
Yeah. I think it's an important thing for the greater society to become well versed in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something, and I'm going to go back into a little bit of the science of it, and something you focus on that first 6 months to 18 months. Can you talk a little bit more about what's physically developing and what we're physically observing?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So we Homo sapiens, we humans, do an interesting kind of thing where our nervous system does a lot of its final development outside of the womb, whereas so many other mammals do most of the development of their brain and nervous system in utero. And so when we are born with an excess, if you will, of neurons. Neurons are these brain structures, and particularly in the brain, but they're out throughout the whole body. And neurons are the way in which parts of the brain communicate to the other parts of the brain, and the way in which the brain communicates to the rest of the body. And so when you're born, you have billions of neurons that are born in developed in fetal life. And you have potential trillions of connections between all those neurons. And what our task is in childhood development is a process of pruning those neurons, which ones we don't need anymore for survival,
Right.
which ones don't serve us well to get our needs met, and then a strengthening of the existing neurons and the neural networks, the connections between those neurons, and the collections of neurons into nerves. And so brain development in the first years of life is this kind of pruning and strengthening. And it is those neurons that we will have and those connections that we will have for the rest of our lives. Unlike much of the rest of the body, like skin, blood, where you develop, it gets decomposed and you grow new skin, new blood. You don't do that with the brain.
That's crazy.
It's the same neurons
Right.
from fetal life. And so that's why it has such a sort of lasting impact into the world.
Well, and like within the first 3 years, you're talking about 90% of the brain development is fixed. It's
Yeah, or being set in place.
set in place. Yeah.
It's being established. It's this.
It's a very short ratio to our entire life.
That's right.
Like 90%.
Yeah, that's why we call it a critical period of development. We certainly have development across the lifespan. People are growing and changing and throughout from womb to tomb. But this attachment development, yeah, it has a particular critical.
I'm giggling because I'm like, oh, you're going to be in a tomb versus a grave.
Womb to grave.
You're very important.
First of all, my kin, we do not have any tombs because we are cremated.
Okay. That's a big distraction. But
That's funny.
I think the really important part there is when we talk about that critical period. And I want to be clear, it doesn't mean we can't change.
That's right.
However,
Because development is across the lifespan.
Right.
Which means change is across the lifespan.
so there's hope in what we do and
Absolutely.
purpose and working with this, understanding it, and hopes that change is available and accessible. But when we talk about that critical period, we really mean critical.
Yes.
It is very important. So like in the therapy space, like when we're talking about your childhood, it's not just because like some really important stuff happened, and how we developed in our childhood really impacts the rest of our life.
It does.
Yeah.
Attachment is never about blaming anyone. It's a judgment-free, a grace-drenched, I think, theory.
Yeah.
Yet it's still a fierce pursuit of understanding that these caregiving experiences that we receive have a shaping experience.
Absolutely.
And the fact that it's hard to change is a reality that everybody should have copious amounts of understanding and grace for themselves and each other.
Yeah. Which is what we were talking about earlier today, is that grace is such a good word, of having that grace and non-judgment of this truly is how we learn to survive in the world, in relationship within ourselves and to others. And so to have grace for that allows and opens up space for change.
Yeah. However that infant brain is developing, it's developing in order to adapt with the world that it is in.
Right.
And therefore it's the correct adaptation,
Right.
even if it may be problematic in later life. And for some of the development, it is problematic later in life.
Right.
Hence why we find ourselves struggling in certain ways and patterned ways, and why we have the need for the whole what's the word? Panoply? Oh, I don't even know what the word is. The whole cornucopia.
Okay.
I don't think that's the right word, but
The pan.
panacea, maybe
Yeah.
there's the word, of healing practices.
Yes.
Psychotherapy being just one of those.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to talk about, I think we should move into the 4 classifications.
All right.
And one thing as we talk about it is that it's not better than the other. It's like they're more of an observation and classification of what's just happened. Like this has happened. And one way I talk about it to clients is that this has happened to you. It's not necessarily like you're born with this. And so this is your reaction to what has happened to your existence.
I'm not afraid to, both clinically and academically.
You're not afraid of a lot of things.
I'm not afraid to be clear that the security of attachment, which is one of the classifications, is optimal,
Sure. Yeah.
and that the others are suboptimal. However, it's very clear that they're always adaptive in nature at their core, no matter what classification it is.
Right.
And since I don't, as a therapist or as a Christian, don't really deal in the economy of blame, I have no need to blame one's parents or their parents, because at some point we just go all the way down the line. It's
extremely generational. It's just passed down.
we are who we are, and it is what it is. We can still articulate that something was suboptimal, not ideal, damaging, and having certain kinds of impacts on our minds and our developing minds, and still hold the ideal toward repair, recovery, healing, growth. So as we talk about the classifications, I don't have a problem with talking about how security of attachment is optimal. It is ideal, but there's no judgment toward anyone for not being securely attached,
Right.
self included.
Cheers.
And it's not also a statement that you can't be a good person when you're not securely attached. Right? Like, 'cause this isn't about morality, and it's not of that only good people are securely attached. It doesn't work that way. It's not a one for one.
Well, and I didn't put this in our notes to talk about, but so I'm going to interject this. This may be removed later.
Or maybe deliciously delighted in for its improvisational nature. Go ahead.
In the adult attachment realm, the way I look at the attachment system is we can be one of the four, like secure being one. I'll reveal them in a second. Wait for the reveal. But the three others that are insecurely attached, we can be classified in those, but the attachment system really doesn't come online until there's a threat. So without the threat, this attachment system that's trying to keep us safe, it's not needed. And so we just live. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. I don't ever think, this is where I think you and I
differ
the most. Yeah, because I never articulate it that way. And I know that there are well-respected articulators and consumers and producers of attachment research and literature.
It's kind of
do articulate it that way.
Yeah, it's kind of the idea that attachment is, for me, seen it's called ARE. So accessible, responsive, and engaged. So if that criteria is met, then my attachment system of reaction and trying to repair, trying to get my needs met, like my needs are already met, so I don't have to do anything. So I just get to exist.
Yeah.
But the moment that threat happens, and one way I talk about threat is, am I loved? Do I matter? Will you be here? If all three of those again exist, then there's no threat. But if I question whether I'm loved, if I question whether you'll be here, or if I matter, then my attachment system comes online and activates, and I go seeking that. And so I go seek, if you're accessible, can I reach you? Will you respond to me with my problem, with my concern? And once you understand the concern, will you engage with it? So that to me is the attachment system and how it operates.
Yeah, sure. We're probably going to get in the weeds of those later and again on repeat.
Over and over. Let's go to classifications. Thanks for redirecting.
Yeah. No, it's good. So Bowlby, as our forefather who coins the term attachment or attachment bond and really heightening the focus and importance of the bond between mother-child in particular. His students, mainly Mary Ainsworth, comes up with a scientific way of classifying distinct forms or classifications of
You did it
of attachment.
I refer to them as styles frequently.
And I refer to them as classifications. But we can
and then judge me for using styles
or myself. So we have 4 distinct general classifications, from secure to disorganized, or secure to insecure, rather, from a more organization to disorganization, coherence to incoherence. And those are tricky words.
Yeah. So we can apply so much blame and shame to them.
That's right. And in that sort of classic scientist lab coat, laboratory kind of way, it's just an attempt to try and understand something. It's not, it doesn't hold any moral judgment, but when we digest these terms in everyday use, the morality comes in pretty hard.
Yeah. I just really want to hold on to that and keep repeating
Absolutely. It's annoying that has to be that way, but that is our world,
right? Full
of judgment and shame and guilt.
So let's start with secure attachment.
Yeah. So security of attachment is reflective of not only infants, but also adults, where there's a high value of relationships, high degrees of a capacity to both explore the world and also make use of comforting, soothing, reassuring relationships. It's characterized by minds that are highly flexible, minds that have the capacity to take on multiple perspectives.
Right. Very curious.
Curious minds, absolutely. And where relationships are usually not just valued, but found to be satisfying, would be described as being highly present and available, good listeners, and attuned to other people's states or needs, and also gets associated with qualities like being easily soothed and comforted and comfortable with closeness in intimate relationships, comfortable with distance in appropriate relationship, and seem to be able to navigate those different kinds of relationships pretty flexibly and easily.
I also see it secure as being very aware of your needs and not afraid to ask for them, to be open about them, take risk.
Yeah, I was just talking about that in sessions, I think this day, earlier today. It's not only knowing your needs and not only knowing or not being afraid to advocate or seek those needs, however they need to be met, including in the social world, but it also entails the capacity to identify available people. So I don't go to Starbucks for my Home Depot needs.
Right.
And that security of attachment it makes it easier for us to be aware of what kind of need do I have? Do I have a caffeine need? Or do I have, I don't know, a hole in my wall that I need to patch up need?
Right.
And then once I'm accurately able to identify that need, I then accurately make my way to Starbucks, or I accurately make my way to Lowe's to then ask available people to help participate in meeting this need.
So you're kind of opening up a new way for me to think about it, is that a secure attachment is very resourceful.
Yes, but I want to clarify that.
Okay.
Because very resourceful in making use of the social world in particular.
Right. So the social being between self and others.
Yes.
Because we're going to get other classifications where we can be very resourceful.
Correct.
Within ourselves, depending on others too much. So yes.
Yep.
A balanced resourcefulness.
Yeah, balance.
Okay.
Yeah, very resourceful in meeting needs that can be easily met within ourselves, and resourceful in getting those needs met that can only or would be best served in the social context, in the social world.
Yeah. In relationship.
Yeah, in relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're going to move, so that's secure attachment, because we're going to, in future episodes, we're going to break individual.
Yeah, in more detail.
In more detail. Yeah. So we'll attempt to do a flyby. We're both long-winded a bit. But the next one is anxious attachment.
Yep.
And there's many names for it.
Yep.
And so let's talk about really quickly why there's so many names, and then we'll name the ones within it.
Yeah, so many names because this A is an evolving theory and an evolving body of literature that's not been around for 100 years yet. It's more like 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And increasingly so. And because some researchers have been studying these concepts in the context of infancy and childhood and toddlerhood, in the context between parent and child. And other researchers have been studying this in the adult context. And so you have multiple researchers at the same time studying in different contexts that are articulating it somewhat differently.
Right. Trying to understand it, metabolize it.
Yep. And so sometimes it can reflect your theoretical tradition. It will reveal the way you talk about the different classifications. It can, or styles. There's one way that it reveals your tradition, classifications versus styles, who your influences have been and how you've come and entered into this scientific body of knowledge.
Right.
Yeah. So we know that that might be a little confusing, and we hope to reduce the confusion, but we will use multiple names for the different classifications because it's in the literature. It's definitely in pop culture that way. And they all highlight certain aspects of each classification.
Right.
But we'll try to be a little more consistent.
We'll try.
Yes, aspirational.
Because there are many names to anxious attachment, which I'm going out of order. I just realized.
That's all right.
Which is okay.
There's no real order. We just had a agreed upon order.
We had agreed upon order that I just bailed on. Because I was thinking like the most names, and anxious attachment does have the most names.
Yes, and that's sort of reflective of the affect energy of the classification.
So with anxious attachment, it can also be known as preoccupied, ambivalent. What are the other?
Entangled.
Entangled. Yes, that's your favorite one.
Yeah,
you use that one a lot. And then in my world of emotionally focused therapy, we use the languaging of pursue, pursuer. But those are all the different ways, because of the vast research and body of work that is attachment and how we're trying to organize and understand it. It just uses all those: anxious, preoccupied, ambivalent, entangled, pursuer. There may be more. Those ones we're the most versed in, I think. So describe anxious attachment a little bit. What are the hallmarks of it? Quick overview.
Yeah, quick overview. Goodness. Anxious attachment, entangled attachment. So folks tend to experience the world through their body and through affect. That's how they make sense of the world. That maybe is how they lead. They lead with affect and embodied experience. Anxious attachment often has developmental experiences where they were heavily involved in their parents' emotional minds, the parents' emotional states of mind, and often had maybe experiences where they were pressured to achieve high standards, including not just like going to Ivy League schools or getting a certain career, but in the most basic and elemental early kind of experiences, to be very obedient and high performing.
Hyperactive, maybe not in the term of like
Not
ADHD.
not in terms of ADHD.
But focus and I'm not using the right word, not hyper.
Hypervigilant.
Yes, thank
is
you.
the word you're
There we
looking at.
go.
So they will often be hyper vigilant to the proximity in terms of childhood, hyper vigilant to how close or distant they are from a parent, and are often highly distressed at those separations from their caregivers, and often have a difficult time then being soothed in the reunification
Yes.
with the caregivers, and maybe even reject the soothing at times at the reunification.
Which can be so hard as a parent,
Absolutely.
caregiver,
1,000%.
partner.
Yes.
It can be hard in so many ways because
Friend.
it's rejected, right? It's appeared, it seems to be
right.
rejected.
That's right.
It's actually not, but
Correct.
it's desperately wanted.
Yes.
Yeah. But something else to talk about with the anxious attachment that I think is important is that languaging can be really hard there. That anxious can often be confused of like, oh, if I'm anxious, I have anxious attachment. And that could be so wrong.
So very
It's not
wrong.
true.
They're very distinct concepts
Right.
and very distinct phenomenon. Even if those that would be classified as anxiously attached have a degree of hypervigilance, startability, they're startled or distressed more easily, and they feel it and embody it and emote it. But folks that are securely or avoidant or disorganized, I revealed it, any of the other classifications, can have a separate freestanding troubling amount of anxiety and an anxiety disorder like panic attack disorder or OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so anxiety is not the exclusive purview of the anxious attachment,
Right.
by any means.
So because the diagnosable anxiety disorders, phobias, those can exist in any of the insecure attachments.
Absolutely. And to some extent, the securely attached too.
Okay.
It's less likely.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
It's less likely, and it's more likely to remit quickly in the security of attachment, because security of attachment functions as a inoculating, vaccinating immune system, but it's not fail-safe. We're all human, no matter where you are on that spectrum of attachment. So anxious, ambivalent, entangled. So there's often a difficulty in distinguishing between my needs and your needs in the anxious attachment classification, a difficulty in understanding another person's perspective from their own perspective rather than an extension of theirs. And all of these behavioral sort of manifestations are all aimed at trying to get emotionally regulated, get one's needs met,
Be connected.
be connected.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's one of the,
All holy things.
yes. And it's one thing I point out in my couples work quite often. And I'll introduce it as this is why we're doing the work, is because you see across from you and you judge the reaction, the behavior. But what I'm here to help you uncode is seeing how this behavior is actually a desperate attempt to connect you while it looks so opposite. It's almost like, how in the world is screaming at me, trying to get close to me? But through the attachment lens, that's what we'll see.
Absolutely.
And in particular with the preoccupied, the entangled attachment, it will look maybe frantic. It may look outwardly loud, but in its essence, it's really trying to get back to the connection, to the safety.
And it only particularly probably seems outwardly loud.
Right.
To folks that are third category, dismissively or avoidantly attached.
Right.
So a second form of insecure attachment is dismissive and avoidant.
Right.
Those two different names. A classification that we are sort of fond of because
if there's one to be, it's this.
I mean, and statistically, security of attachment and dismissive avoidant attachment comprise. Oh, that's the hard word. Comprise the vast majority of people in the world. Those two classifications.
Yeah, I want to clarify. When I say it's the one to be, that's not actually true.
No, that's right.
Right? There's no judgment.
That's right.
We all survive. But you and I both come by it very naturally.
Indeed. And I think in you saying that, you're trying to embody that there's no reason to be judgmental to anything about any of this. It's just that the dismissive attached is likely going to interpret and experience the anxiously attached as being loud.
Right.
Whereas from that anxious attachment camp or lens, they're going to experience themselves as being very proactive and very relational and, from their own subjectivity.
Right.
Even if it's not working very well in their new environments that have new confines and new opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the avoidant or the dismissive attachment, that language is much more about someone in development learning that the best way to ensure the parental proximity, the caregiver proximity, to therefore meet their needs was to avoid their own needs.
Right.
To dismiss their own relational, emotional needs. And so you see lots of kind of independence. And when you use that word like resourceful, dismissive attached folks can be rather seemingly resourceful and independent.
Very much so.
And in an American Western context where we certainly value rugged individualism and self-advocacy and self-determination and yada, yada, yadas, it can appear, prized and better. But it stems from repeated experiences where you're going to caregivers with those attachment needs and are turned away. And it sort of constitutes a sort of shutting down, powering off those relational, emotional needs.
Right.
And we think that we are serving the world and our partners best when we take care of all of our needs by ourselves.
But I want to clarify, it's not only our needs, it's also their needs. The way we view it, the way the withdrawer views it, the way, that's the other word.
Yep.
Dismissive, avoidant, withdrawer. It looks like isolation and going away on the outside.
Yes.
But it is internally, I'm saying this for myself, is I am deeply attempting to take care of others.
Yes.
By taking care of myself and my needs. But in return, feeling like, interpreting that I am also therefore taking care of you.
That's right.
And
in hopes that then you will be more available to me.
Right. Exactly. You will love me more.
I will be lovable.
Yes. Yeah. The one thing that you really will get in my crawl, I don't even know what that word means, but
I had to move to Texas to learn that.
Is when people who don't really understand attachment will connect withdraw, avoidant, dismissive as not being able to love.
Oh, goodness.
Not wanting a relationship.
Oh, goodness.
And it can't be farther from the truth.
Or not loving.
Right. Yes. And I know that usually that's coming across because people are feeling that in relationship with them.
Sure. Also understandable.
But for me, it's painful to hear. It's like, oh no, it's like I am constantly thinking of others in my withdrawal because I want to stay in relationship.
Yeah.
And I want to be loved by.
And that you wouldn't understand that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
In the other's subjectivity.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's a good distinction.
Which moves us.
The withdrawer, avoidant, dismissive is likely going to kind of register in their mind a pursuer or an anxious, ambivalent, entangled attachment as being intrusive,
right,
and impinging.
Stop chasing me. I will take care of this.
Or they stop chasing me and telling me that I'm a failure.
That I'm wrong.
I'm trying to be independent
and be good enough, not failure.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a delicious.
We may have a bias.
Yeah, that's right, and we absolutely do.
So let's move on to the last category, classification.
Yeah, disorganized, unresolved. It has gone by different names depending on what time of period that we're talking about. But disorganized can be understood as someone who uses two different strategies that seem somewhat incompatible, which is that dismissive avoidance strategy and also the entangled preoccupied strategy. And they can vacillate between the two, which can be confusing to people, including researchers who don't originally recognize it and just think, we don't know what to do with that. It's just, we can't even classify that. And with further study, we've seen the sort of intelligence of that mixed strategy. Yet it also, we recognize that it often comes from childhood experiences where the caregivers were either frightening to the child or the caregiver was frightened in and of themselves. And so because of the vacillating, shifting ways of navigating relationships, it can have a degree of disorganization, hence the term. And I don't know what else to say about that, but maybe it's enough.
And I think where I would highlight a little more the emotional side of it is there's so much unresolved and not a particular strategy that was successful at any point.
Yeah.
And so it leaves you really confused, disorganized on how to engage with yourself and others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to get your needs met. Not that you don't know how, like disorganized they can succeed in business. They can function and do things, right? But the intrapersonally is really lacking in understanding how they are loved and how to get their needs met relationally. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. I think if you've ever received some feedback because and there's a sense that your classification would be unresolved and disorganized, it is such an indication that something gravely happened to you, something, and rarely just a thing.
Oh, it's repetition.
Likely across time, across years, and then so inadequately responded to across even more years. And it indicates that the way in which those significant and painful and rather traumatic experiences from childhood still have such a strong influence on how your mind is operating and functioning.
Yes.
And so no one should ever feel shame for an unresolved, disorganized attachment classification. You are entitled and deserve the whole universe's
all attention and care
and attention and attunement to recover and repair. Yeah, absolutely. 4 classifications.
Yeah, we did it.
Enough.
So we did enough. Just a review real quick. So secure attachment is one classification.
Secure attachment, dismissive or avoidant attachment.
It's number 2.
Anxious, ambivalent, entangled attachment.
Preoccupied.
Disorganized, unresolved.
Yeah.
That's the order we talked about.
That's what we originally started. Yes, talked about.
And in part because you have security toward insecurity, you have organization toward disorganization, and you also have the statistical frequency. Most folk are securely attached, and securely attached folks still struggle in life because life is a struggle and bad things, terrible things still happen in securely attached folks' lives. Folks are securely attached, then avoidant, dismissive attached, and anxious, entangled, ambivalent, and disorganized. Sort of statistically it goes in that order too.
So from here, the next couple episodes, we're going to be deep diving into those 4 classifications. Again, really getting into the nitty gritty and laying the foundation of what we're going to be doing in the future podcast. I had this anticipation that it's going to get a little more fun once we, not get past, but once we finish introducing the science of attachment. Then we're going to move into some more pop culture things.
Yeah.
The one I'm really excited about that we have planned for next is going to be using the attachment lens while watching the show The Bear.
Yes.
Super excited.
I'm more than excited.
Yeah. We've been taking notes, watching, rewatching. It is just full.
Chock full.
Yeah. So,
and it got me to watch TV.
I'll pull you to the dark side. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for my delicious cocktail.
We'll probably have another.
And thank you even more so for you.
Back at you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Signing off.